Book 1, Chapter 5 of On the Education of an Orator, by Quintilian, translated by H.E. Butler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. Style has three kinds of excellence: correctness, lucidity, and elegance. For many include the all-important quality of appropriateness under the heading of elegance. Its faults are likewise threefold, namely, the opposites of these excellences. The teacher of literature, therefore, must study the rules for correctness of speech, these constituting the first part of his art. The observance of these rules is concerned with either one or more words. I must now be understood to use verbum in its most general sense. It has, of course, two meanings. The one covers all the parts of which language is composed, as in the line of Horace: once supply the thought, and words will follow swift as soon as sought. The other restricts it to a part of speech such as lego and scribo. To avoid this ambiguity, some authorities prefer the term voces, locutiones, dictiones. Individual words will either be native or imported, simple or compound, literal or metaphorical, in current use or newly coined. A single word is more likely to be faulty than to possess any intrinsic merit. For, though we may speak of a word as appropriate, distinguished, or sublime, it can possess none of these properties save in relation to connected and consecutive speech, since when we praise words, we do so because they suit the matter. There is only one excellence that can be isolated for consideration, namely Euphony, the Greek term for our vocalitas. That is to say that, when we are confronted with making a choice between two exact synonyms, we must select that which sounds best. In the first place, barbarisms and solecisms must not be allowed to intrude their offensive presence. These blemishes are, however, pardoned at times, because we have become accustomed to them, or because they have age or authority in their favor, or are near akin to positive excellences, since it is often difficult to distinguish such blemishes from figures of speech. The teacher, therefore, that such slippery customers may not elude detection, must seek to acquire a delicate discrimination. But of this I will speak later, when I come to discuss figures of speech. For the present, I will define barbarism as an offense occurring in connection with single words. Some of my readers may object that such a topic is beneath the dignity of so ambitious a work. But who does not know that some barbarisms occur in writing, others in speaking? For, although what is incorrect in writing will also be incorrect in speech, the converse is not necessarily true, inasmuch as mistakes in writing are caused by addition or omission, substitution or transposition, while mistakes in speaking are due to separation or combination of syllables, to aspiration or other errors of sound. Trivial as these points may seem, our boys are still at school, and I am reminding their instructors of their duty. And if one of our teachers is lacking in education, and has done no more than set foot in the outer courts of his art, he will have to confine himself to the rules published in the elementary text-books. The more learned teacher, on the other hand, will be in a position to go much further. First of all, for example, he will point out that there are many different kinds of barbarism. One kind is due to race, such as the insertion of a Spanish or African term. For instance, the iron tire of a wheel is called canthus, though Persius uses it as established in the Latin language. Catullus picked up proxenum, a box, in the valley of the Po, while the author of the In Polionem, be he Labienus or Cornelius Gallus, imported cassamo from Gaul in the sense of follower. As for mastruca, which is Sardinian for a rough coat, it is introduced by Cicero merely as an object of derision. Another kind of barbarism proceeds from the speaker's temper. For instance, we regard it as barbarous if a speaker use cruel or brutal language. A third and very common kind, of which any one may fashion examples for himself, consists in the addition or omission of a letter or syllable, or in the substitution of one for another, or in placing one where it has no right to be. Some teachers, however, to display their learning, are in the habit of picking out examples of barbarism from the poets, and attacking the authors whom they are expounding for using such words. A boy should, however, realize that in poets such peculiarities are pardonable or even praiseworthy, and should therefore be taught less common instances. For Tinga of Placentia, if we may believe Hortensius, who takes him to task for it, committed two barbarisms in one word by saying precula for pergula, that is to say, he substituted C for G and transposed R and E. On the other hand, when Ennius writes metoioque fufetioio, where the barbarism is twice repeated, he is defended on the plea of poetic license. Substitution is, however, sometimes admitted, even in prose, as for instance when Cicero speaks of the army of Canopus, which is locally styled Canobus, while the number of authors who have been guilty of transposition in writing Trasumenus for Tarsumenus has succeeded in standardizing the error. Similar instances may be quoted. If adsentior be regarded as the correct form, we must remember that Sisenna said adsentio, and that many have followed him on the ground of analogy. On the other hand, if adsentio is the correct form, we must remember that adsentior has the support of current usage. And yet our fat fool, the fashionable schoolmaster, will regard one of these forms as an example of omission, or the other as an instance of addition. Again, there are words which when used separately are undoubtedly incorrect, but when used in conjunction excite no unfavorable comment. For instance, dua and tre are barbarisms and differ in gender, but the words duapondo and trepondo have persisted in common parlance down to our day, and Messala shows that the practice is correct. It may perhaps seem absurd to say that a barbarism, which is an error in a single word, may be made, like a solecism, by errors in connection with either number or gender. But take on the one hand scala, stairs, and scopa, which literally means a twig, but is used in the sense of broom, and on the other hand hordea, barley, and mulsa, med. Here we have substitution, omission, and addition of letters, but the blemish consists in the former case merely in the use of singular for plural, in the letter of plural for singular. Those, on the other hand, who have used the word gladia are guilty of a mistake in gender. I merely mention these as instances. I do not wish any one to think that I have added a fresh problem to a subject into which the obstinacy of pedants has already introduced confusion. the faults which arise in the course of actual speaking require greater penetration on the part of the critic, since it is impossible to cite examples from writing, except in cases where they occur in poetry, as when the diphthong is divided into two syllables in Europae and Asiae, or when the opposite fault occurs, called synairesis or synaloipe by the Greeks, and complexio by ourselves. As an example, I may quote the line of Publius Varro, tum te flagranti delectum fulmine phaeton. If this were prose, it would be possible to give the letters their true syllabic value. I may mention as further anomalies peculiar to poetry the lengthening of a short syllable, as in Italiam fato profugus, or the shortening of a long, such as unius ob nox summit furias. But in poetry we cannot label these as actual faults. Errors in sound, on the other hand, can be detected by the ear alone, although in Latin, as regards the addition or omission of the aspirate, the question may be raised whether this is an error when it occurs in writing, for there is some doubt whether h is a letter or merely a breathing, practice having frequently varied in different ages. Older authors used it, but rarely even before vowels, saying aidus or ircus, while its conjunction with consonants was for a long time avoided, as in words such as gracchus or triumpus. Then, for a short time, it broke out into excessive use, witness such spellings as corona, centuria, or praeco, which may still be read in certain inscriptions. The well-known epigram of Catullus will be remembered in this connection. The spellings vehementer, comprehendere, and mihi have lasted to our day, and among early writers, especially of tragedy, we actually find mehe for me in the older manuscripts. It is still more difficult to detect errors of tenor or tone. I know that old writers spell the word tonor as derived from the Greek tonos, or of accent, styled prosody by the Greeks, such as the substitution of the acute accent for the grave, or the grave for the acute. Such an example would be the placing of the acute accent on the first syllable of Camillus, or the substitution of the grave for the circumflex in cetegus, an error which results in the alteration of the quantity of the middle syllable, since it means making the first syllable acute, or again the substitution of circumflex for the grave on the second syllable of api, where the contraction of two syllables into one circumflexed syllable involves a double error. This, however, occurs far more frequently in Greek words such as atrei, which in our young days was pronounced by the most learned of our elders with an acute accent on the first syllable, necessitating a grave accent on the second. The same remark applies to nerei and terei. Such has been the tradition as regards accents. Still, I am well aware that certain learned men and some professed teachers of literature, to ensure that certain words may be kept distinct, sometimes place an acute accent on the last syllable, both when they are teaching and in ordinary speech, as for instance in the following passage: Quae circum litora circum piscosos copulos, where they make the last syllable of circum acute on the ground that, if that syllable were given the grave accent, it might be thought that they meant circus, not circuitus. Similarly, when quale is interrogative, they give the final syllable a grave accent, but when using it in a comparison make it acute. This practice, however, they restrict almost entirely to adverbs and pronouns. In other cases they follow the old usage. Personally, I think that in such phrases as these the circumstances are almost entirely altered by the fact that we join two words together. For when I say circum littera, I pronounce the phrase as one word, concealing the fact that it is composed of two; consequently it contains but one acute accent, as though it were a single word. The same thing occurs in the phrase Troiae qui primus aboris. It sometimes happens that the accent is altered by the metre, as in pecudis pictaeque volucres, for I shall read volucres with the acute on the middle syllable, because although that syllable is short by nature, it is long by position, else the last two syllables would form an iambus, which its position in the hexameter does not allow. But these same words, if separated, will form no exception to the rule, or, if the custom under discussion prevails, the old law of the language will disappear. This law is more difficult for the Greeks to observe, because they have several dialects, as they call them, and what is wrong in one may be right in another. But with us the rule is simplicity itself, for in every word the acute accent is restricted to three syllables, whether these be the only syllables in the word or the three last, and will fall either on the penultimate or the antepenultimate. The middle of the three syllables of which I speak will be acute or circumflexed if long, while if it be short it will have a grave accent, and the acute will be thrown back to the preceding syllable, that is to say, the antepenultimate. Every word has an acute accent, but never more than one. Further, the acute never falls on the last syllable, and therefore in dissyllabic words marks the first syllable. Moreover, the acute accent and the circumflex are never found in one and the same word, since the circumflex itself contains an acute accent. Neither the circumflex nor the acute, therefore, will ever be found in the last syllable of a Latin word, with this exception, that monosyllables must either be acute or circumflexed, otherwise we should find words without an acute accent at all. There are also faults of sound, which we cannot reproduce in writing, as they spring from defects of the voice and tongue. The Greeks, who are happier in inventing names than we are, call them iodicisms, lambdacisms, ischnotetes, attenuations, and plateiasmoi, broadenings. They also use the term koilostomia when the voice seems to proceed from the depths of the mouth. There are also certain peculiar and indescribable sounds for which we sometimes take whole nations to fault. To sum up, then, if all the faults of which we have just spoken be avoided, we shall be in possession of the Greek orthoepeia, that is to say, an exact and pleasing articulation, for that is what we mean when we speak of correct pronunciation. All other faults in speaking are concerned with more words than one. Among this class of faults is the solecism, although there have been controversies about this as well. For even those who acknowledge that it occurs in connected speech argue that, since it can be corrected by the alteration of one word, the fault lies in the word and not in the phrase or sentence. For example, whether amarae corticis or medio cortice contains a solecism in gender, and personally I object to neither, as Virgil is the author of both. However, for the sake of argument, let us assume that one of the two is incorrect. Still, whichever phrase is incorrect, it can be set right by the alteration of the word in which the fault lies, that is to say, we can emend either to amari corticis or media cortice. But it is obvious that these critics misrepresent the case, for neither word is faulty in itself. The error arises from its association with another word. The fault therefore lies in the phrase. Those who raise the question as to whether a solecism can arise in a single word, show greater intelligence. Is it for instance a solecism if a man when calling a single person to him says venite, or in dismissing several persons says abi or discede? Or again, if the answer does not correspond to the question, suppose, for example, when some one said to you, "Whom do I see?" you were to reply, "I." Some too think it a solecism if the spoken word is contradicted by the motion of hand or head. I do not entirely concur with this view, nor yet do I wholly dissent. I admit that a solecism may occur in a single word, but with the proviso: there must be something else equivalent to another word to which the word in which the error lies can be referred, so that the solecism arises from the faulty connection of those symbols by which facts are expressed and purpose indicated. To avoid all suspicion of quibbling, I will say that a solecism may occur in one word, but never in a word in isolation. There is, however, some controversy as to the number and nature of the different kinds of solecism. Those who have dealt with the subject most fully make a fourfold division, identical with that which is made in the case of barbarisms. Solecisms are brought about by addition, for instance in phrases such as nam enim, de susum, in Alexandriam; by omission in phrases such as ambulo viam, Aegypto venio, or ne hoc fecit; and by transposition, as in quoque ego, enim hoc voluit, autem non habuit. Under this last head comes the question whether igitur can be placed first in a sentence, for I note that authors of the first rank disagree on this point, some of them frequently placing it in that position, others never. Some distinguish these three classes of error from the solecism, styling addition a pleonasm, omission an ellipse, and transposition anastrophe; and they assert that if anastrophe is a solecism, hyperbaton might also be so called. About substitution, that is, when one word is used instead of another, there is no dispute. It is an error which we may detect in connection with all the parts of speech, but most frequently in the verb, because it has greater variety than any other. Consequently in connection with the verb we get solecisms of gender, tense, person, and mood, or states, or qualities, if you prefer either of these terms. Be these types of error 6 in number, as some assert, or 8, as is insisted by others, for the number of the forms of solecism will depend on the number of subdivisions which you assign to the parts of speech, of which we have just spoken. Further, there are solecisms of number. Now, Latin has 2 numbers, singular and plural, while Greek possesses a third, namely the dual. There have, however, been some who have given us a dual as well, in words such as scripsere and legere, in which, as a matter of fact, the final syllable has been softened to avoid harshness, just as in old writers we find male merere for male mereris. Consequently, what they assert to be a dual is concerned solely with this one class of termination, whereas in Greek it is found throughout the whole structure of the verb and in nouns as well, though even then it is but rarely used. But we find not a trace of such a usage in any Latin author. On the contrary, phrases such as devenere locos, conticuere omnes, and concedere duces clearly prove that they have nothing to do with the dual. Moreover, dixere, although Antonius Rufus cites it as proof to the contrary, is often used by the usher in the courts to denote more than 2 advocates. Again, Does not Livy, near the beginning of his first book, write tenuere arcem Sabini, and later in adversum Romani subiere? But I can produce still better authority. For Cicero, in his Orator, says, I have no objection to the form scripsere, though I regard scripserunt as the more correct. Similarly, in vocables and nouns, solecisms occur in connection with gender, number, and more especially case, by substitution of one for another. To these may be added solecisms in the use of comparatives and superlatives, or the employment of patronymics instead of possessives, and vice versa. As for solecisms connected with expressions of quantity, there are some who will regard phrases such as magnum peculiolum as a solecism because the diminutive is used instead of the ordinary noun, which implies no diminution. I think I should call it a misuse of the diminutive rather than a solecism, for it is an error of sense, whereas solecisms are not errors of sense, but rather faulty combinations of words. As regards participles, solecisms occur in case and gender, as with nouns, in tense, as with verbs, and in number, as in both. The pronoun admits of solecisms in gender, number, and case. Solecisms also occur with great frequency in connection with parts of speech, but a bare statement on this point is not sufficient, as it may lead a boy to think that such error consists only in the substitution of one part of speech for another, as for instance if a verb is placed where we require a noun, or an adverb takes the place of a pronoun, and so on. For there are some nouns which are cognate, that is to say, of the same genus, and he who uses the wrong species in connection with one of these will be guilty of the same offence as if he were to change the genus. Thus an and aut are conjunctions, but it would be bad Latin to say in a question hic aut ille sit. Ne and non are adverbs, but he who says non feceris in lieu of ne feceris is guilty of a similar mistake, since one negative denies while the other forbids. Further, intro and intus are adverbs of place, but eo intus and introssum are solecisms. Similar errors may be committed in connection with the various kinds of pronouns, interjections, and prepositions. It is also a solecism if there is a disagreement between what precedes and what follows within the limits of a single clause. Some phrases have all the appearance of a solecism, and yet cannot be called faulty. Take for instance phrases such as tragoidia tuiestes, or ludi floralia and megalentia. Although these are never found in later times, they are the rule in ancient writers. We will therefore style them figures, and though their use is more frequent in poets, will not deny their employment even to orators. Figures, however, will generally have some justification, as I shall show in a later portion of this work, which I promised you a little while back. I must, however, point out that a figure, if used unwittingly, will be a solecism. In the same class, though they cannot be called figures, come errors such as the use of masculine names with a female termination, and feminine names with a neuter termination. I have said enough about solecisms, for I did not set out to write a treatise on grammar, but was unwilling to slight the science by passing it by without salutation when it met me in the course of my journey. I therefore resume the path which I prescribed for myself, and point out that words are either native or foreign. Foreign words, like our population and institutions, have come to us from practically every nation upon earth. I pass by words of Tuscan, Sabine, and Praenestine origin, for though Lucilius attacks Vedius for using them, and Pollio reproves Livy for his lapses into the dialect of Padua, I may be allowed to regard all such words as of native origin. Many Gallic words have become current coin, such as raida, chariot, and petoritum, four-wheeled wagon, of which Cicero uses the former and Horace the latter. Mappa, napkin, again a word familiar in connection with the circus, is claimed by the Carthaginians, while I have heard that gurdus, which is colloquially used in the sense of stupid, is derived from Spain. But this distinction between native and foreign words has reference chiefly to Greek, for Latin is largely derived from that language, and we use words which are admittedly Greek to express things for which we have no Latin equivalent. Similarly, they at times borrow words from us. In this connection, the problem arises whether foreign words should be declined according to their language or our own. If you come across an archaistic grammarian, he will insist on absolute conformity to Latin practice, because, since we have an ablative and the Greeks have not, it would be absurd in declining a word to use 5 Greek cases and 1 Latin. He will also praise the patriotism of those who aimed at strengthening the Latin language, and asserted that we had no need of foreign practices. They, therefore, pronounced castorem with the second syllable long to bring it into conformity with all those Latin nouns which have the same termination in the nominative as castor. They also insisted on the forms palaimo, telamo, and plato, the last being adopted by Cicero, because they could not find any Latin nouns ending in on. They were reluctant even to permit masculine Greek nouns to end in as in the nominative case, and consequently in Celius we find pelia cincinatus, and in Messala bene fecit eutia, and in Cicero hermagora. So we need not be surprised that the majority of early writers said ainea and anchisa, for it was urged, if such words are spelt like maikenas, sufenas, and asprenas, the genitive should terminate in tis, not in e. On the same principle they placed an acute accent on the middle syllables of Olympus and Tyrannus, because Latin does not allow an acute accent on the first syllable if it is short and is followed by 2 long syllables. So too we get the Latinized genitives ulixi and achilli, together with many other analogous forms. More recent scholars have instituted the practice of giving Greek nouns their Greek declension, although this is not always possible. Personally, I prefer to follow the Latin method, so far as grace of diction will permit, for I should not like to say calypsonem on the analogy of eunonem, although Gaius Caesar, in deference to antiquity, does adopt this way of declining it. In other words which can be declined in either way without impropriety, those who prefer it can employ the Greek form. They will not be speaking Latin, but will not, on the other hand, deserve censure. Simple words are what they are in the nominative, that is, their essential nature. Compound words are formed by the prefix of a preposition, as in innocens, though care must be taken that 2 conflicting prepositions are not prefixed, as in imperterritus. If this be avoided, they may in certain cases have a double prefix, as in incompositus or reconditus, or the Ciceronian subabsurdum. They may also be formed by what I might term the combination of 2 independent units, as in maleficus. For I will not admit that the combination of three is possible at any rate in Latin, although Cicero asserts that capsis is compounded of cape si vis, and there are to be found scholars who contend that lupercalia likewise is a compound of three parts of speech, namely luere per caprum. As for solitaurilia, it is by now universally believed to stand for suowe taurilia, a derivation which corresponds to the actual sacrifice, which has its counterpart in Homer as well. But these compounds are formed not so much from three words as from the fragments of three. On the other hand, Pacuvius seems to have formed compounds of a preposition and two vocables, that is, nouns, as in nere repandi rostrum incurvi cervicum pecus, the flock of Nereus, snout uplifted, neck enarched. The effect is unpleasing. Compounds are, however, formed from two complete Latin words, as for instance superfui and subterfugi, though in this case there is some question as to whether the words from which they are formed are complete. They may also be formed of one complete and one incomplete word, as in the case of malevolus, or of one incomplete and one complete, such as noctivagus, or of two incomplete words, as in pedicecus, footman, or from one Latin and one foreign word, as in biclinium, a dining couch for two, or in the reverse order, as in epitogium, an upper garment, or anticato, and sometimes even from two foreign words, as in epiraidium, a thong attaching the horse to the raida. For in this last case the preposition is Greek, while raida is Gallic, while the compound is employed neither by Greek nor Gaul, but has been appropriated by Rome from the two foreign tongues. In the case of prepositions, they are frequently changed by the act of compounding. As a result, we get abstulit, aufugit, amisit, though the preposition is ab, and coit, though the preposition is con. The same is true of ignavus and erepublica. But compounds are better suited to Greek than to Latin, though I do not think that this is due to the nature of our language. The reason, rather, is that we have a preference for foreign goods, and therefore receive curtauchen with applause, whereas we scarce defend incurvi cervicus from derisive laughter. Words are proper when they bear their original meaning, metaphorical when they are used in a sense different from their natural meaning. Current words are safest to use. There is a spice of danger in coining new, for if they are adopted, our style wins but small glory from them, while if they are rejected, they become a subject for jest. Still, we must make the venture, for as Cicero says, use softens even these words which at first seemed harsh. On the other hand, the power of onomatopoeia is denied us. Who would tolerate an attempt to imitate phrases like the much praised lynxebios, the bow twanged, and sitzen ophthalmos, the eye hissed? We should even feel some qualms about using ballare, to baa, and rhinire, to whiny, if we had not the sanction of antiquity to support us. Chapter 6